Hello, Women of Welcome. I'm Sarah Quezada, and today we're going to be talking about a few immigration headlines that we want to be paying attention to. If you are new here, Women of Welcome is a community of Christian women pursuing compassion and Christ-like welcome for immigrants and refugees. And we're glad you're here. You can always follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Women of Welcome. And if you're interested in asking deeper questions and being part of a community that you can talk to and learn from and share with, we invite you to find our private group on Facebook at Women of Welcome as well. So there's a few things I want to jump into today because let me just say, if you have been thinking lately, man, it seems like every time I open an app, there is some kind of memo or judiciary ruling or news headline about immigration. I agree with you 100%. It can feel really, really overwhelming to keep up with what exactly is happening, especially right now with a lot of the judge rulings. It's like, wait, didn't we already talk about that when it was proposed or when it was enacted and then it was contested and now it's going through the court systems? So there's all these moving pieces. So I want to highlight three things today that are recent and current that I'm paying attention to, that we at Women of Welcome are paying attention to, and that I hope you will join us in watching as well. So, and not just watching, we also want to be praying for these things, acting when it's possible, supporting people that are on the ground and involved in these works as well. So, first of all, I want to talk about DACA. Many of you celebrated with us a couple weeks, months, years. How long ago was that? I think it was just a couple weeks ago that the Supreme Court issued their ruling protecting DACA, protecting Dreamers from deportation, and saying that program needed to be reinstated. And again, if you're not familiar with what I mean when I'm talking about DACA, which actually stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or the difference between DACA and Dreamers, we have previous videos that I would encourage you to check out that break some of that down. And so it's always new to somebody, and that's okay. So we try to make sure we have resources so that you can join in the conversation and get that background as well. But yesterday, the administration issued a memo saying that they would not be reinstating it exactly. They would not be accepting any new applications, and the current DACA recipients would need to renew annually, whereas it's previously been every 2 years. The good thing about this memo is that after the Supreme Court ruling, many people were concerned, and there was kind of some rumblings that the administration was going to try a different method of ending DACA altogether. So it's great that we're seeing that's not happening, at least in the short term, that it seems there's going to be a little bit of reprieve from that. However, it is concerning for people who qualify and now cannot apply, even though the Supreme Court ruling suggested they should be able to. And then also just the expense and hassle and instability of having to renew annually in the way things currently are, with a lot of offices being closed and knowing that the administration has expressed their desire to end this program. It's really difficult for people who are recipients of DACA. And so World Relief actually issued a statement, and this is something, if you remember when we were talking about the Supreme Court ruling, we kept saying, this is good news temporarily, but we need a permanent solution from Congress. And so that invitation to reach out to our congressional leaders and say, we need a permanent solution for Dreamers, that is still needed. That's still been needed for all of these years that DACA has been in existence, and previously when the DREAM Act was being considered in Congress as well. So again, we have a bunch of that history in other videos if you want to check that out. But that's something that we're paying attention to this week. It is discouraging to see that the program's not being reinstated as the federal ruling suggested. But again, we still need that permanent solution. And so that's really the heartbeat of the DACA conversation. The second thing that we want to talk about is many in our community have been either following along, or we have women in our community who are actually working along the border. And, many of us have we've been talking about the migrant camps there for, the last many months or years, as people have been waiting for what was called the Remain in Mexico program, or MPP, Migrant Protection Protocol, which had migrants waiting at the border for their U.S. court appearances. and legal processes. And so we've seen those tent camps continue to grow. Coronavirus closed the border. And now with recent hurricane rains, we've seen just some real difficult circumstances continuing at the border. This is not an ideal situation for anyone who's there. And so we've been grateful for women in our community who've been able to update us on what they're seeing and experiencing in the ways they're serving. But we also want to pay attention to some news that was announced this week, and that the UN Refugee Services, wait, let me check my notes. I want to make sure. UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. I don't know what all of that stands for, but I know it's the UN Refugee Agency, that they are actually going to be putting some housing units and essentially creating some refugee camps on the Mexican side of the border. Again, this has some good news for people who were in some really inadequate housing arrangements, especially with the rains. At the same time, the reality that we're creating essentially a refugee camp at our border is really sobering. A few years ago, I actually took my kids to an exhibit where they were talking about the work that Doctors Without Borders was doing in different refugee camps. And we saw these blown up images of refugee camps. And I was honestly stunned. I had no idea it was so many people. I didn't know how long people stayed there. Actually, let me share this resource. This is a book I read a couple years ago now called Once We Were Strangers by Sean Smucker, who is a Christian. And he shares about his friendship with a Syrian refugee that moves to his town in Pennsylvania, I think. And it gave me, well, it's a fascinating, captivating read. I mean, I think I read it all in like 2 days, but it also gave me an inside look at refugee camps and just the challenges that people face in those circumstances that was like nothing I had previously honestly thought about. The boredom, I think coronavirus has probably all given us a new insight into what it might look like to not know exactly what you'll be doing a week from now or a month from now or a year from now, and kind of maybe for some of us not having as much to do. And so I think this will be an even more relatable story, but I think when I read it, I was definitely struck and surprised by what I learned. So I encourage you to check out that book if you're interested. And the third thing that I want to make sure we're paying attention to, and this to me was really, it caught me off guard, which is that you may have heard us talk over the last year about safe third country agreements. And this is essentially the idea that if an asylum seeker arrives in a country that is a place where they could be safe from whatever they're seeking asylum from, that they need to apply for asylum there first before going on to another country. So typically this has been an arrangement that we've had with Canada. So if an asylum seeker comes to the US first, they can't go on to Canada and claim asylum. They would do that in the US and vice versa. It's been used really in different ways over the last 6 months to a year, as the U.S. has signed third safe country agreements with Guatemala, and I know they were trying to do one with Mexico as well. And so this idea that if asylum seekers went through Guatemala or Mexico, that they had to apply for asylum there first, which many people were raising issue with because there might not be the same safety protections that people are actually trying to pursue. But this week, Canada actually, a judge ruled that the U.S. is no longer safe for asylum seekers. And so people who have come through the U.S. and are going on to Canada can now apply for asylum in Canada because they're saying the U.S. is not a safe place for asylum seekers. And that's just, and I don't know the details of the Canadian process, so I don't know if that will hold up or how exactly that will look enacted. But I think the messaging and the questioning there of whether we're offering safety is really something to be paying attention to. And I know as believers, as people who recognize that asylum seekers are made in the image of God, these are all things that we're paying attention to, how they're being housed, whether or not they're being let in to stay with family they may have in the States. So we want to keep praying together, sharing and learning and growing and advocating. And so I hope that's helpful as you think about what's happening in the news right now.